that's coming. That's also being recorded. And yeah, okay, so thank you for joining us in this futuring exercise, where we will explore our visions of the future while trying to remain embedded in this world right now, right in the present. So just to give you like a quick background, what are we about and what is this about? So the workshop came about from the Indigenous Protocols for Artificial Intelligence Working Group. This is kind of like a place for those who want to design and create AI from an ethical position that centers Indigenous concerns, actually. And we actually shared the IP AI position paper with you for preparation for this exercise. So if you can like gloss over it even now or after, it's going to give you some food for thought too, and how the group kind of centers itself in its concerns. So, of course, while centering the indigenous concerns, the framework for building indigenous protocols is actually a way for us to destabilize the hegemonic notions of technology that we inherit from the Western history of ideas, just for the lack of a better term, but you know, the ideas that rest on the incommensurability of dichotomic divisions between mind and body, nature, culture, society, community. And so what we experience with the current dominant paradigm of technology is actually an alienation. That's what we experience in our everyday. It's just this alienation that's perpetrated by, you know, attention capture mechanisms that work to either control or discipline the human sensoria. And what seems to be missing in the conceptions and design of contemporary cybernetic technologies, especially the technologies, is a discussion on communities and values that the technologies themselves actually convey. There is no methodological commitment to think of these artifacts as always already entangled within their use communities. And we don't also see a critical approach to the conditions of production for those technologies. They always come to us as black box kind of technologies. And if you're familiar with science and technology scholarship, there has been a critique of this kind of engineering paradigm for a while. So there's been, but also you are maybe aware, there's a recent insistence on designing ethically, especially artificial intelligence technologies. But we see that this is also a debate that is with, you know, not with genuine concern for how to build anything ethically necessary, but this debate really goes on with corporate interests and political alliances between the technological elite, really. So our relationship with technology is already kind of problematic for this reason. There's this top-down kind of relationship that's established. And further with this, there's this narrow kind of futurism that underlies our contemporary visions of technology, right? Technology is always a promise for an easier, optimized, and efficient future. And it's a future that just doesn't come. So the techno culture promises an eternal novelty, but it is often the same old future that keeps coming back. The same social structures, same social roles, same power differentials. And actually, philosopher Mark Fisher also points this phenomenon, and he calls this the slow cancellation of culture. So our workshop will build on these ontological epistemological concerns, but we will not dwell on these problems. Rather, we'll be engaging in a practice of imagination, and a practice that gets harder and harder to make space for in our cynical cultural moment, let's say. So we will be reflecting on our communities, their needs, their values, and a commitment to build anything ethically. And we will be thinking of technologies of the future in their context, with social relations, with cultural concerns, and a sense of responsibility for the other, whether it's human or non-human. So quickly, we will, from here, we will be introducing to you. Well, I'm just going to give you the flow, Suzanne, if you can move to the next slide. So we will be moving towards the schedule of events this year. First, we will be introducing ourselves. Jason Edward Lewis, who is also part of our team, is actually not here, wasn't able to join us live today, but we will be sharing his presentation. He has a video. We'll be introducing ourselves, and we'll talk about what does it mean to build anything ethically, really. And then we'll dive into this imagining the future exercise with you. So I think we can move on with Jason's introduction. Thank you.
So before we move on, I'm just going to, say who we are. We have myself. My name is Suzanne Kite, and I am a Oglala woman, and I have brown hair, and I'm wearing a white T-shirt, and I have a fake bookshelf behind me.
Kaisho, I'm Michelle Lee Brown. I'm Uskaluna, so I'm a Basque woman. I'm wearing glasses, I have bangs, visible tattoo, and blurred out behind me is some lovely floral wallpaper, which you can't see, thankfully.
Very nice. And I'm Ceyda Yolgormez. Sorry, I just closed my window for some reason. I'm Ceyda Yolgormez. I'm Turkish. I'm having my hair down, and I also have a tattoo that sometimes comes in and out. And I'm behind me, what you see is scripts from my thesis, just my drawings on the wall, basically.
So now we're going to watch Jason's presentation, and Jason is a Hawaiian and Samoan man.
Hello, everybody. I am Jason Edward Lewis, and I'm going to talk about the idea of the future imaginary for the next few minutes. So in the way that I think about it, the future imaginary is composed of a couple things. It's a vision of the future shared by a group of people and used to motivate change in the present. It provides communities with a shared vocabulary for discussing the future and strategies for getting to the future they desire. And it centrally incorporates capacity building within the community so the community can take control of how such futures get built. But it's also a set of strategies for creating worlds of our choosing. So it provides us, so future imaginaries provide us with ways to revise our sense of what is possible. So we can get out of the assumptions of what are the facts of our social and political worlds and really think freely about other ways of being otherwise. We can ask our own questions. So the work that I do is largely with Indigenous communities. We often are in a position where people are asking questions for us. This particularly comes, from academics, a long history of research being done on Indigenous people and sort of solutions generated for Indigenous people without actually asking us what we want to have answered and what we want to have explored. It's about asserting our presence in the future. So again, Indigenous people, if you look at, one of the main ways we have in our current contemporary culture for imagining the future, which is through science fiction, particularly in film and video games, there are often very few Indigenous people, if any. There are very few brown people. This is slowly changing, but certainly we've grown up with many generations now of futures that have been imagined where there are no Indigenous people, there are no brown people. And I would argue that that is the dominant Western future imaginary, is the future imaginary of Star Wars, right? Where it's like, you look around, you're like, wow, this is kind of funny, all these different planets, and most of these people are white. We get to romance our sovereignty. And the idea here is that we can imagine being self-determined again. We can imagine having control over our lives as individuals, but as community members, as people working together to create the kinds of communities that we want. And it's really necessary to imagine that, because that's not where we are in some sense now. Certainly, the Indigenous people, the communities I'm working with, are still very much living within a colonial framework that controls many aspects of our lives. So the kind of the romance part of it is that we need to kind of just let go and sort of kind of let the practicalities and the challenges and the heartbreaks of living under that situation of control, we need to let it go and really kind of think freely about what it might be like if we could really determine what is happening with our communities. And of course, we need to practice futures together. The idea there is that this is a way for us to talk with each other and establish common visions, and then sort of practice those together, sort of inhabit these future imaginaries, so that we can get a sense of not what it's like just as individuals, but what it might be like as groups of people, as communities, as nations, in that future that we're imagining. So this is just a really quick taste of some of the future imaginaries that we have helped support over the last 15 years. And by we, I mean Aboriginal territories in cyberspace and the Initiative for Indigenous Futures. So on the upper left there's Jesse Tunglik, who is Inuit, and he imagines a spaceship. He's sort of imagining what it might be like to be Inuit going out into space. And so he's imagining a spacesuit, not a spaceship. He's imagining a spacesuit made out of seal skin, because of course seals are very central to Inuit culture. And so thinking about how to bring that thing that's really central to his culture into a future frame, into space, into thinking and dreaming about being an Inuit astronaut. On the upper right, this is Blueberry Pie Under a Martian Sky by Scott Benison-Abandan, where he, who is Anishinaabe, and he used virtual VR installation to imagine what it might be like for a young Anishinaabe boy to return to the Seven Sisters, to return to the origin place of Anishinaabe using wormhole technology. Bottom right is Kale Malika'a Collective, which is the group of students that were in our first Skins workshop on Aboriginal storytelling and video games in Honolulu, which took place in the summer of 2017. And part of what they did is they were imagining Kanaka in space. So what might it mean to bring, for instance, Kanaka Maoli or Hawaiian astrogation techniques, so techniques for navigating across vast distances using the stars in part, out into actual outer space, and use that to navigate between planets and solar systems and stars. And then on the lower left is the Peacemaker Returns, which is, so sorry, the Hawaiian piece was a video game, and then Skawanati's piece is a machinima. So a movie made in virtual environments. And so it's called The Peacemaker Returns. And so she's imagining taking the teachings of a person who was very central to the coming together of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, or Iroquois Confederacy, of which the Mohawks are part, and Skawanati is Mohawk. And so the Peacemaker brought the different nations together into the Confederacy, using a philosophy of government, basically, called the Great Law of Peace. And so she imagines sort of both that event, and then she imagines a new peacemaker for our contemporary situation, bringing together all of the nations of this planet. And then she imagines a future situation where yet another peacemaker brings together 5 different intergalactic species in order to make peace. So I'm going to talk specifically about future imaginaries for Indigenous AI. For me, this is, I think, a really great example of how future imaginaries can work. So we conducted a series of workshops called the Indigenous Protocol and Artificial Intelligence workshops, which had as their core question, from an Indigenous perspective, what should our relationship with artificial intelligence be? And so this was a really amazing kind of sustained exercise in creating future imaginaries. So bringing together a number of Indigenous folks and a couple non-Indigenous folks from all over North America, the Pacific, Aotearoa, and Australia, brought them to Honolulu to spend 3 days talking with each other about this question and imagining what kind of futures working with this technology we wanted to have for our communities. And, you know, future imaginaries don't have to be all sort of sci-fi like. They don't have to be fantastical, right? They can be very mundane in some ways. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I use the term future imaginary as opposed to indigenous futurism for the sort of work that I do, is that I'm interested in both the kind of really kind of crazy and out there and fantastical, but also the very much also the mundane sort of day-to-day of how people might live in the future, right? So what might it be like, you know, to walk out my door and see all the street signs in Olelo, Hawaii, right? In Hawaiian language, right? That's a future imaginary that doesn't exist. It certainly doesn't exist where I live in Montreal. It would be Mohawk here instead. You know, but it doesn't exist. It exists to some extent in Hawaii, but it's not sort of blanket and it's not comprehensive. So imagining that kind of world is a future imaginary. So out of the workshops, we produced the Indigenous Protocol and Artificial Intelligence position paper. So it's a pretty substantial document that I really encourage everybody to go take a look at. There's sort of something for everybody. There's academic journal articles, there's poetry, there's short stories, there's descriptions of technology prototype development. So there's a really wide range of approaches to answering that question of, you know, what might AI created from an indigenous perspective, what might it look like? So this is part of my contribution. I contributed a poem series that was built around this idea of a young Hawaiian person being raised alongside 3 different AIs. So one of the AIs would be based on Hawaiian concepts of caring for the land, of responsibility to the land and everything on it, and then also your kinship networks. Another AI would be based on sort of inspired by Leroy Little Bear, talking about the Blackfoot language being a process or flow-oriented language. And so having an AI that sees the world as a collection of energy flows as opposed to a series of objects to be manipulated. And then a third AI that was based on the sort of neural architecture of the octopus with its highly distributed neural system that allows the 8 arms to sort of autonomously process things on their own with very little intervention from the central cluster of nerves. So in thinking about what it might be like to have some, to have an AI that had that kind of processing power. And so this allows me personally to think about, okay, what kind of future do I want to have with AI personally as a Hawaiian person, and also sort of in Hawaii. Part of the future imaginary is, to go back to my language example, we're translating the entire position paper into Hawaiian, because that's part of that imagination as well, right? So imagine a future where all the learning materials that we have for the technologies that we use are in the language of your community, so that you don't constantly have to kind of go outside that language to learn about technical things. And also we can take care, like we did in this translation, to really sort of find the right way of describing these technologies within the cultural framework, of the communities that we're working with, right? And this is really fun. You sort of need to think up of new words because they don't necessarily already exist in the language. You need to think about what is it that already exists in the language and the way that we are seeing the world that allows us to, understand something like artificial intelligence. And that actually, because of all that, how we understand artificial intelligence might be different from, say, the Western dominant framework for understanding artificial intelligence. And then there's the, I just want to talk quickly about the Anu Olelo Programming Collective, which sort of did work for a couple of years, and they've kind of gone quiet now. We help support them. They in part came out of that Skins video game workshop that I was talking about earlier in Honolulu. But this was a group of young Hawaiians who were looking at how to create a Hawaiian language version of C# for use in the Unity programming environment, because they were using Unity to create video games in virtual environments. But they wanted to be able to do that using the language directly instead of having to always resort to English. And also, they're very interested in developing sort of methodologies and developing a language version and methodologies so that this this Hawaiian language version of C# could be the one that's used to teach young people who are in Hawaiian immersion schools. So schools in Hawaii where the majority of instruction is in the language, is in Hawaiian. Because again, there's that challenge there, is that a lot of times for things like science and technology, in order to do the instruction in those subjects, they have to break out of the context of their language, right? And go into English in order to learn those things. And so what does it mean, again, to learn science and technology within your own language? And I think that's it for me today. And I hope you're enjoying the workshop. Thank you.
Great. So that was Jason. And yeah, I think this is kind of the question going forward from throughout this workshop. Michelle, did you want to speak on this?
Yes. So for me, I'm going to introduce myself briefly in the next slide, I think. But I also want to just center that for me, just the way I was raised and the way sort of my brain and senses processing thing, it's always relational. So I think for us keeping in mind for the future imaginary, especially the visualization, which non-humans are present, and the idea that Noe Arista talks about in the IP and AI and the Making Kin with Machines paper about balanced flourishing. So which growth is restrained, which growth is encouraged and is now flourishing again. So here we go, more formal introduction. My Nana would be proud. So ongiatori emin zugnitoi, ikustin saitustanak, eta ikustin es saitustanak. So the translation is below. This is me giving a welcome. And it's interesting to think about doing these more over Zoom, you know, as the pandemic has extended and in-person visiting has been restricted. Michelle Brown naisni, uskaldona et the Saxon naisni. So it's interesting for me to be presenting in what is currently Europe because it has a different context. And so for me, talking about being French Basque and that understanding that way of knowing has a different resonance. And I really appreciate this opportunity. And I say currently not to be cutesy, but to remind people that Europe as a construct is not atemporal. It's not an always existing thing, that we were around and other indigenous communities were around beforehand and we will be around after. So when I use that language, it's also to help break apart some of the things that keep getting taken for granted, or to perhaps use Patrick Wolf once again to interrupt those structures of settler colonialism, which tend to keep reasserting themselves and reinventing themselves in different ways. Washington tiknator, umatieren itcheik, gaur emen sureken egoteko. I had to shift a little bit because I just moved from New Hampshire to Washington State, where I'm speaking with you now, and the Umatia are the people of this place and these waters. So, sure sendogaria emen nakuzuteni. So I'm going to be guiding you through the visualization, and I do take that seriously. And this is my way of welcoming all of us here in this space and to let you know I'm your strengthener and I am here for you. You can advance, Suzanne, thanks. I can advance, I guess, yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about S, which is a nourishing negation. And it's something I talked about a little bit in my dissertation and a little bit in my IP and AI piece. S in Euskara, which is the Basque language, is a very sharp S sound. I always joke it sounds like the Southern California pronunciation of an S. It's almost a hiss, which for us, since we come from a giant serpent-like creature, that seems like appropriate for me. It can be playfully or intentionally extended, but it requires breath, much like Alelo Hawaii does, but in a different way. And so for us, we start with S, we start with the negation, and it's what you clear out. And I like to think of it as that moment between that last exhale of breath and the next inhalation. That moment there is really powerful and really generative. It's releasing concepts and ideas we don't need or we no longer want, and then holding space for a brief moment before inhaling and taking in other things. And so when I say non-human, I do not mean it to indicate lesser. And I know people use other terms like other than human and more than human. For me, I use non-human because it connects right back to us, and S being that foundational understanding for us. So it's both generative and space clearing for me. And that's why I use it throughout the talk and the workshop we're going to be doing today. So the Chichardan project is something I'm currently working on, and probably will be working on for a very long time in the future. It came out of the IP and AI workshops. The piece is what I talk about in the IP and AI position paper, and I'm thinking through the VR project that is a part of this. But this came about as I was trying to conceptualize our relationship with eels, because they've been over harvested to the point where it's been said that it might take about 200 years for them to come back again if they aren't constantly being harvested again, because traditionally we would catch some of the young eels as they came back from their ocean journey as they moved up into the rivers. And obviously they're being sold for thousands and thousands of dollars per kilo, I think. So yeah, it's been a problem. Unsurprisingly, if you overharvest the young eels, you have fear of the adult eels to then continue those generations. And my family, I'm learning more about this. We were eel caretakers. And so this project was a way for me to think through our relationship with eels and to think through those protocols and to ask myself, what would this look like in a relationship and also in the structure of AI and systems if we continue this eel-human relationship in different ways in the future? And the Chichardan project came out of that. Chichardan is an older word for these eels. Angola is the term that's used, or langoustine is the term that's used more commonly because it's easier to pronounce and less indigenous language scary sounding, I guess. So I went back to Chichardan as sort of a call to reinvigorate ourselves and to embrace that discomfort, to learn how to say these things, to learn what they mean, to learn how to let them roll off our tongues once again. I'm also working on a story series for that called Ancient Future Relations, which is thinking through some of the different generations across different points in time and their kinship with these biotech eels and the humans who interact with them in sometimes what seems like discomforting ways, but it is consensual on both entities' parts. And so the Chichardan project part 2, this is again connecting to the IP and AI workshops. And here is where I think the discomforting part comes in, because the eel actually enters the human sorgina, the human handler's arm. And so some people, it depends on which community you're from. I'm learning if you're from a water community, it can be sort of intriguing. And if you're not, it's straight out of a sci-fi horror movie, or an old X-Files episode or something like that. But for me, this was, again, thinking through what does it mean to literally care for and communicate with these entities as they come into you. And this is a page that was drawn by Kari Noe, and I'm really grateful to her because my first sketches sort of looked like slugs with lettuce on their head before she helped me elaborate that concept a little bit more. And then here's some screenshots from the Eel Elder VR project. There's a lot of interest in building the eel, which I am excited about at some point, but what I was afraid of is that sort of the biotech components and the underwater computer technology parts would sort of overtake what was more important to me, which was the programming and thinking about relational protocols, which would structure the systems. So we decided to start with a VR system in which there's an AI in the eel elder that you interact with. And we're designing this AI around the IP and AI 7 guidelines, and it's in process right now. And I'm really grateful to the Newcomb Institute at Dartmouth because they fully funded the project. And it's going to be free to use, and we're hoping to distribute some of the code and some of the ways that we built it in hopes that other people could take it and then build their own versions of it using some of what we have to offer them. But the idea is also, sorry, Suzanne, if you could advance one more. The idea is within this, that this is an elder, and you can advance again, thank you. And so at certain points you have to ask to leave the VR system game because this is an elder you're interacting with. And if you entered their place of learning, you wouldn't just walk out anytime you felt like it. So in the VR, you actually have to ask to leave. And if you take off the headset anyway and end the session before the elder has said, okay, it's time to end it, you have to rebuild your relationship with them. They may not appear right away the next time you're in the game itself. And lastly, I wanted to touch on this idea of a comic liminal. I think this is another really interesting way to think about future imaginaries and imagine different speculative futures. This, for me, it's part of the Relational Constellations Sovereign Traces collection. And it was me thinking through a couple of different things about what it meant to be someone so immersed in, you know, this French Basque culture that my Nana was pouring into me, but being on someone else's lands and waters, and also being the one who was sort of marked to go through university settings. I was going to be the one, right, who was going to go through school settings. And I used the metaphor of an araina, which is a flying fish, which I have a fondness for and our family has a fondness for. And I also kind of touched on my Nana and some of my older family members, like giving me lots and lots of early 1900s encyclopedias and all kinds of journals, in the hopes that somehow that would help, you know, shape me for this university journey I would be undertaking. And so in the comic, I represent her as this really old version of a giant squid with her glasses on with the little mother of pearl dots in the corner. And then thinking about also crossing different realms and worlds, which I think for the processes we're going to be going through today, and you're going to be probably thinking more about throughout this whole session and these, you know, and these, all of these events together, I think thinking about jumping realms, crossing realms has a lot of relevance when we think about AI and digital technologies. And then finally, I'd like to end with this one. This was me remembering that, yeah, I think when we talk about our ancestors, when we talk about past, there is a lot of pain and there is a lot of trauma and loss mixed in with the joy, and that's okay. You know, and sometimes it's a way to reimagine ways that we can connect and celebrate with them across different realms and spaces and times.
Thanks a lot, Michelle. I think I'll move on with my introductions. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Ceyda Yolgormez. I told you I'm Turkish. And following this tradition of greeting in our language, I wanted to do the same. So in my culture, people say when they meet each other, esenlikler dilerim. So it's a way to wish peace upon actually everyone, kind of like to the world, but we see it if we see each other. And sağlık, salimlik, iyilik ve rahatlık. So health and safety and goodness and comfort is just a way to kind of, you know, create a comfort zone, I guess, in our first encounters, rather than, you know, informing the other of our position. Yeah, so I'm doing my PhD in sociology. I'm at Concordia University, and I'm looking at socialization of artificially intelligent agents. I'm looking at artworks mainly and human-machine collaborations. Suzanne, if you can move on. But today I'm going to talk to you about the works that I've done during my PhD, which is, even though I have this commitment to study AI and I'm interested in the questions of technology when it comes to the high social theory, let's say, that is deeply humanistic in its both methodological commitments, but also ontological assumptions. So for me, throughout my undergrad process, training, it became kind of apparent this lack in the sociological literature for dealing, while this is sociology is a discipline that finds itself in the relationality, that starts itself from the relationality. So everything in sociology is built relationally, right? Every reality is constructed relationally. But this relationality conception is, again, a very humanistic one, which only presupposes relations between human entities and not necessarily non-human ones. Because when sociology says relation, it is a social relation, and social relations obviously are human in this context. So for me, it became kind of interesting to play with that, because also seeing how my life is so much revolved around technology, and also engaging with post-colonial literature a bit, and then further on with the indigenous scholarship as well. It became kind of important for me to center non-humans as a way to subvert the manner in which sociological theory positions itself in the contemporary reality. So my work really tries to, while focusing on the AI, tries to conceptualize relationships well, with the aim of decentering the human and making apparent other persons within that relationalities. If you can move, thank you. So my first presentation, I worked with Alexa, the virtual assistants, and we presented this as part of FOREST, the Society for Science and Technology, Society for Science Studies, and we built this. This was kind of like an ethnographic experimentation, really. We, dealt with Alexa. We tried to see how long we can keep a conversation going with Alexa, actually, without breaking interaction orders, with this non-human that is designed with particular corporate interests. Our question was, can we break into this black box thing that's called Alexa? And so our work really highlighted the uncertainties of engaging with virtual assistants, but also formulating these objects, these virtual assistants, as having their own cultural biographies, not just simple commodities that are sold and bought off the market and designed by technological elite, rather as entities that are capable of creating new relationalities and with the potential to break away from their commodity identity, and perhaps just gathering stories around themselves. And Alexas usually end up in the shelf somewhere in the house unless they're used actively. So we wanted to see what happens in between those stages. Next. And from this kind of engaging with the machine, I was wondering, what does it mean? What would it mean to construct a sociology of AI, a kind of like a thought experiment, but also with a program commitment? This came about from my comprehensive exams, actually, and I wrote a paper about it then. So my question here was, again, what is the social that is conceived in the artificial intelligence technologies? What is the social that can be there? Because AI technologies, we all talked about it, but it's going to become even more apparent, is in this, they're always imagined as things in a void, as brain in a vat, as things that are devoid of relations. They don't come from nowhere, they go nowhere. There is no sociality in the sense of inviting relationalities to itself in the conceptions of the design. But this is not how, obviously, technological relations occur, because designers don't control the human behavior. So what ends up happening, so what I tried to unpack here was the underlying sociality that underpins our well, both the present and the future of building these technologies. So I really focused on the dynamism and interactivity in the AI systems. And I focused on also mathematical, computational mathematical literature, and seeing how they center also dynamism and uncertainty within their own theories, which also, of course, keep the backbone of the AI research, let's say. So I do think of this uncertainty and indeterminacy as the core of sociality, which then becomes even more significant when we are surrounded with stochastic algorithms or programs or techniques that do build on the uncertainty, especially in COVID times. I think we experience this a bit more. So thank you. So then I started, exactly, Suzanne, you got me perfect, thank you. So then I started also working with a collaborator, Joseph Thibodeau, here again in Milieu Institute, in our research group, actually, Machine Agencies. And he built these small robots that are highly dynamic agents that are intertwined with their environment. So these kind of Breitenberg vehicles that have very small sensors, but they carry and they work on a neural network structures. So what they do is just like they keep getting inputs from their environment, and they try to and they just exhibit dynamic behavior. I don't want to go into the technicality of it. We can talk about it later. So these machines are really prone to breaking away. They're just useless. And henceforth, we wanted to see how, if these machines can invite through their uncertain behavior, some sort of sociality. Next. So we wrote about this in 2 papers. First one is the open source sentience, the proof is in the performance. It was part of the International Symposium of Electronic Arts last year. And we kind of grounded our project in the contemporary understanding of human-robot relations as this site for competition and control, basically. So we were wondering, it's kind of similar to our workshops aims, in the sense that how can we go beyond these narrative toolboxes, our cultural toolboxes that are rooted actually in the instrumentalization of technology and machines, rather than, you know, positing them as relations that we have to sustain. So then by building and designing useless machines, we wanted to trouble that a bit. What do you do with a broken machine? What do you do with a broken technology? And that's where things might get a bit interesting, I guess. And we actually started talking about also fetishization as a mode for not just like, of course, I don't want to go into anthropology. So if you are maybe familiar, you would know this history, but fetish is always this bad thing that communities of the Africas do. So the fetish is just like a misunderstanding that people have about the nature of reality, because they think of objects as having godlike properties. So I was wondering if we could actually turn this around, and if we could conceptualize fetish as a way to cultivate social relations, as a way to form new social contracts. So not fetish as a Marxist type of deconstructive project, or a Freudian type of underlying kind of libidinal need for deconstruction again. Rather, we wanted to build it as a way to construct the social, once again, including different ontologies and relationalities with it. I hope it made sense so far. Thank you so much for listening. We move on.
Awesome, thank you so much, Ceyda. You know, I'll say Halmataki Akpi, what time is it? On Petu Washte. Suzanne Kite Macha Pikishto, Oglala Hemacha, I'm Oglala Lakota, Chante Washtea Nape Chiusapo, and relatives, I shake your hands with a happy heart. So currently I'm in Muskogee Creek Reservation, which is Tulsa, Oklahoma, Elwati. And I am an artist primarily. I'm a PhD candidate at Concordia University as well. And I am mostly concerned right now with research involving Lakota ontologies. So thinking about the ways that my people already have relationships with non-humans, such as stones. So understanding that if we're trying to make relationships with artificial intelligence in the most reductive, basic way, these things are melted stones. And we already, in many cultures, and especially Lakota culture, already have covenants with non-human beings, such as stones. Covenants is like my favorite word right now. It's a great word. Yeah, and I'll show some of this is kind of my artistic work. I perform at the hair braid interface, which is basically fake hair, and I connect it with different accelerometers and electronics in order to interact with the computer. This was primarily developed in 2018 after I had begun my PhD work at Concordia, prompted by a workshop that the Initiative for Indigenous Futures does. It was guided by Jason Lewis and Skawanati, called 7th Generation Character Design, which was challenged Indigenous students to think about who they wanted to be in 7 generations from themselves. And I often think of this, it could be 7 generations, physically 7 generations, artistic or intellectual or philosophical descendants, and what tools did I want that descendant to have to survive 7 generations from now. And the very clear answer when coming out of Lakota epistemology is an extension of the hair. So I'll play a little bit of this piece. So in this piece, We see Lakota geometric designs. Here's some deep bass. And in this piece, I have I'm moving the hair braid interface. It's controlling a synthesizer.
Listen in the darkness.
And the synthesizer is being listened to by Rebecca Freebrink's machine learning program, Wekinator. And then it is changing and growing this compass, and then I'm watching the compass and making decisions about how to move the hair braid. So in short, I'm in the circular decision-making process with the computer. So this is a more current work, a collaboration with Devin Ronneberg. This is on tour in Australia and it's currently still installed in Saskatoon. And this is, I consider, as an interactive machine learning sculpture called Iantie, or Telling Rock. And it's made of song, power, sound, processors, machine learning decisions, handmade circuitry, gold, silver, copper, aluminum, silicon, and fiberglass. And this is a dome. This is a vision looking up at it from the ground. And it is a acrylic dome encapsulating 2 handmade circuits. And so when the hair braids are touched or moved, the machine learning algorithm changes a voice and changes the lights in the hair. And this comes from the same impulse as my research, which is I'm thinking about ways to ground the frameworks, to look at Lakota ways of making new knowledge and grounding my work in those as frameworks. So this is a dream that my grandfather had translated into a sculpture. So some of the other work I'm very proud of is this project with Alicia B. Wormsley, who's an Afrofuturist from Pittsburgh, where we do these dreaming workshops for Black and Indigenous artists to dream together. Most of my work is very reliant upon my conversations with my family, my aunts, and especially my cousin Corey. Here's us welcoming the sculpture in Omaha, Nebraska. So the way I'm thinking about artwork and research creation, as we call it, as a way to make new knowledge is from this kind of framework of ethics come from somewhere. And no matter where you are, they emerge from the land. They emerge from the land, which leads to, if you listen to the land and listen to the non-humans in and on and of that land, you can understand ontologically that there are non-human beings outside of ourselves. And when we understand that, then we can look to them for ways of knowing, new ways of knowing and understanding. And then only from those steps can we have ethics. So for example, my favorite example of this is the prairie chicken. So a very quick version of this very important story. An old man goes to the Black Hills, the place from which we emerged, and as human beings, and he goes there to die. And he lays down to die, except he doesn't die. He lays there for a while, but he's definitely sick, even if he's not dying. And he hears the prairie chicken singing, and the prairie chicken does a dance for him. And then he learns this, listens to that non-human sing the song and learns that song, and it begins to heal him. And it heals him fully, and then he goes down to the people and shares that song can heal. And that is where the Lakota people learned song. And so here, this story follows this exact structure. So I want to make an ethical song. The first step is to listen to the land, to know that non-human beings, such as the prairie chicken, deliver that knowledge and are more intelligent than us as humans. And then we can have an ethical methodology. So that is an example of framework. So if you want to learn more about this, this is my contribution to the IPAI position paper, which emerges out of this Making Kin with the Machines essay, co-written with Jason, Noelani Arista, Archer Pachowis, and myself. And so This position paper, which Jason talked about, which we were all talking about, is the way that within which I'm talking about this concept of making something ethically, how to build anything ethically. So AI here is interchangeable. So we're here talking about AI, we're talking about the future, but AI is just a way to move these concepts through to these audiences. So it's not necessarily, it really could be anything. Oh, going backwards. So my question here for wanting to build an ethical AI is how many streams of protocol? So in Indigenous culture, we think about protocol as the way to do things ethically. All the steps possible. So we need ethical data collection, ethical computing devices, compensating, distribution, use, software design, coding language, like Jason talked about the coding in Olelo, Hawaii. So that's an example of coding language. But what's the ethical protocol to make that coding language? So if we zoom in onto one of these, such as the physical computing device, we think about consultation, stakeholders, raw material, compensation of all beings involved, building it and preparing it, construction, transformation, running it, welcoming, death cycle. So these are some of the questions that I think about. You know, who are the elders for this protocol? How can the protocol be enacted in an ethical way? How can the end of this protocol be completed in an ethical way? So yeah, if you want to read more about that, that's in the IPAI position paper, and in there I'm breaking down a Lakota Sweat Lodge as the framework for building an ethical AI and a physical computing device to house it. Thank you. Ceyda.
Yes, so just a second, sorry. Then we will move on to kind of, well, initially we designed this workshop to have some breakout groups and be able to, you know, congregate and get to know each other a bit face to face and more intimately, but it's not going to be possible, unfortunately, which is no problem at all. We seem to be with 13 people, so we should be fine. So actually, if you can take the time, if you don't mind, to, Suzanne, can you move on? We're going to move on to do our introductions. So if you can, you know, write down your name, your pronouns, your not necessarily affiliations, or if you have any, if you want to add, and
in the chat.
What in the chat, please. And yeah, what was your reason for joining us today? What piqued you here, basically? So if we can take like 5 minutes to, you know, just write it down, and then we'll go through it. And I think and while, you know, doing your introductions, this is the beginning, but we'll be diving more into also where you position yourself as in the community. But let's start with the individuals.
So if you're looking for the chat function, it's down at the bottom of your screen. And I think I'll make everybody, oh no, everyone can chat. Great. I'll make everyone panelists just like us when we go to welcome people to talk and to share.
Hi, Ransha.
type this out. So please introduce yourself. That'd be really great. So for this workshop, we're going to begin the workshop-y part of it. So if you have some paper handy, something to write with, maybe a Word document, something like that, we're going to begin by reflecting on our communities and who our communities are and what our community needs are. So the first question is, what are your communities? Who are your communities? I think we all are part of many communities at once. What are the lands and waters that nourish and feed those communities? Sometimes it's many and multiple, and there's many rivers that intersect or diverge, or shores, multiple shores, and what are the needs of that community, of those communities? And these are questions that have been developed from another workshop I was working on with the Feminist Media Lab in Concordia, and in conversation with some folks, this question of, well, what do I need for my soul to stay alive? What does my 17-year-old self need? Which I think, or you can transpose that to a different age, a very vulnerable age. So when we think about communities with dealing with oppression or with inequity, I think that there are really crucial points at which we do not feel welcomed by the broader communities. So what does your younger vulnerable self need? What did they need? And then finally, how do we decide collectively what we need? So we'll just take a minute to reflect on that, write down a few things, and I'll give us like 2 minutes. Okay, so hopefully you had some time to reflect on who your communities are and the lands and waters that nourish them, and what vulnerable people in your communities need. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Michelle. We're going to do a guided meditation.
Thank you, Suzanne Escarigasco and Escarigasco Ceyda. I'm going to turn off my video while I talk because I want to make sure that my voice is as clear as possible to all the participants to know that I'm still here with you. Okay, so what we're going to do for this part is I'm going to ask each of you to limit your sensory input. And what I mean by that is you can close your eyes, you can turn off your video camera. As long as you keep this audio going, do what you need to do to get ready for this visualization. It should be about 15 to 16 minutes. So please mute yourself because you may giggle or laugh a few times, or you can murmur or speak or sing something, all of which is amazing. Do whatever you need to do in an embodied way to begin, and then fall further into this and really see it, smell it, taste it, and feel it. So what we'll be doing is we're going to be using our senses to learn from different aspects of the vision that unfolds. And this is important, responding to those as you want to, but we want to be mindful of not disrupting everyone else. So I'm going to ask people to mute themselves and turn off the video if they can. If you need that point of connection as we enter what I'm calling this blackness, you can leave the video on, but it may be easier if you shut it off. In any case, know that you have our voices. You have my voice as a dive line to sink down into and then come back up from. Just know that we are here. So get yourself ready and we're going to begin. Now get comfortable. You can lay down, sit down, stand up and move around if you have the space, whatever works for you. Make sure you have your phone on silent, but keep it nearby if you need to take a voice memo or note afterwards. Likewise, make sure if you want paper or a writing tool nearby that they're within arm's reach. Okay, now close your eyes if you can. If it's more comfortable for you, you can put your hands over your eyes or put a scarf or a hat over your eyes. In any case, you want to be feeling yourself beginning to sink into darkness. Now, darkness isn't stillness, and I want you to understand that there's a lot of energy and powerful, deep potential in this darkness I'm talking about. But right now, it may seem like it's just darkness, a rich blackness that will begin to surround us. This is part of our visioning, and it begins with this blackness. Now, obviously, blackness ties into what we've talked about earlier and some of the readings you were assigned before we began this workshop. But here we're talking about blackness in a very particular sense, a deep, rich blackness, an inky darkness that is the start and the source. In the cosmologies and the cosmogonies I come from and that have been shared with me, deep blackness is the source of life. It's where we all come from. It's where all life starts from. And as we say in my community, Gawa Gogapenem Ama, darkness is the mother of thought. It is the source of consciousness and of life. The sparks of life and cognition are from and return to this blackness. And I want to note that for some people, darkness, that kind of rich, inky blackness, may be scary or unsettling, but it should be unsettling, and that can be generative in good ways. So consider this space that we are now in, that we are present within for this exercise, as a space of protected darkness, an enveloping blackness that will support us for this. You are surrounded and watched over by ancestors and guardians that we invoke here, your personal protectors that are with you as you work and as we work together. Know that there are other guides and guardians that each of us carry with us that are here to keep and hold the space for us all. However you see them, however you identify them, just know that they are here. And I say Askarak on knees, thank you. What we're going to do in this darkness is we're going to begin to visualize a gathering of your community in the future. Now, for me, 7 is an important number. So I like to think of 77 years, 700 years, 7,000 years. But for me, that 7 keeps the space protected and it connects past and future. For some communities, especially Indigenous communities, the past shapes the future and they link together on a really deep and profound level. So if it's preferable for you, think of this as a future time that you know is in the future that is connected to you here and to your past. And what you're going to see unfold or sense unfold in different ways are a series of moments that are years in the future. And what it is an event. There's the gathering of your community here. As we noted, community has many different meanings, and this is a gathering of human and non-human members. And if you begin to tense up a bit thinking of community, perhaps not being sure what that exactly means for you, or there's some loss or tears or disconnections, I want you to note that in your body and let that tension go as best you can. Inhale and exhale that out in a nourishing negation push. Embrace the nourishing negation that refuses that tension and lets it go, because what we want to do is take things in here. We want to be able to hear and sense what this image is and what this future potential is. So we inhale and we exhale. And when I say your community, think about that group in the most expansive way you possibly can. Be radically generous with your ideas of community, both human and non-human. Now, obviously, not everyone will be here at this gathering, but in all likelihood, there will be representatives of the smaller groups, communities, and nations within this larger community setting. So for example, for me in this future gathering, there are crows and there are eels, and there are dogs and there are cats, and some of them have biotechnical components. Now, some of these groups, such as cats and crows, have tensions with each other because kinship is complicated. So in this gathering, I saw each group had representatives for them who are trained and who know how to behave, who know the protocols for these particular gatherings together. You don't have to know all the specifics yet. What we're doing now is we're just noticing, learning, and observing who is here from your future community. Start to feel this, that you are visiting a gathering of your community, and that community is in the most radically expansive sense we can push it to. Stretch yourself to take in who is in attendance here. Plants, technologies, lands, waters, rocks, soil. Take it all in as you can. And note that you're just here to listen and hear and smell and taste and see. This is a gathering in the future, a gathering of your community. And they are here because this event is at one of their important and celebratory seasons. This is the time to celebrate. There's richness, there's abundance. The harvest and sharing festivals are just about to begin. So wherever your community is, this is that time for them in the seasonal cycle. Now they are gathered here to celebrate someone in particular. And what they are celebrating with and for is a very particular non-human kin member. This is a member of their community that houses an AI. So the AI and its vessel, its containment system, is a member of their community. It's a relation, it's kin. And maybe it is a multiplicity that are members of their community, as Jason Edward Lewis had noted with the octopus conception. But this AI and the vessel are, just try to see if you can notice, are they different entities? Are they parts of one collective? Is there one there, understanding there are others elsewhere that work with the community? Now, as you imagine this scene more deeply and more fully, some of you may already be seeing it or you're hearing it. Perhaps you're tasting and smelling just aspects or glimpses of it. The sensory input will happen as we move through this space. And as I am talking, for some of you, the images and sounds may happen. For others, different sensory input may arrive first. And I just want to say all of this is wonderful, and take it in and be patient with it. Stretch your imaginings and sense more of it. And if nothing is happening or very little, just relax and trust you'll get some input, and that is the input you need. You don't have to open your eyes, you're just taking it in, really being there and being witness to this, which is a gift in and of itself. So if the scenes come and go, or they're faint, or some of it comes immediately and then kind of fade out, that works too. Just stay with me and keep going. What I'm going to do for the next few minutes is offer different sensory cues for you, different layers to keep this embodied for you. They may help immerse you back in it so that you can be there again and be a witness to it. Or they may help you take it in more and go more deeply into this scene. Or it may just be simply an audio cue as it unfolds for you in particular ways that you go with. So in any case, here we are. We are at this gathering. I'm going to ask you a few gentle questions. You don't have to answer right now. These are for you to take some notes for yourself. Who is there? Who is gathered in this space? Our tendency may be to go right to that AI, that non-human entity, but it's important to understand that as we enter these spaces, as a part of our community protocols, we know who is there. What are they doing? Are they sitting? Are they standing? Are they moving? Are they singing? Are they talking amongst themselves? Who might be talking to whom among the community representatives? Are some of them standing further apart from others? Are they all present, or are some of them still arriving? And as you start to observe this, observe how these community representatives interact with the AI or non-human community member that they are celebrating. Have they brought gifts or other items for it? Did you enter mid-celebration, or did you enter as they were all entering? Or are they almost done? Perhaps you're past the formal protocols and we're in the eating and sharing and laughing times. Wherever it is, just note this gently, and if the scene seems to skip or shift, that's also fine. Take in where you are, where you think you might be in a ceremony or other gathering. Is it a ceremony? Perhaps it's more informal, and that works too. Whatever form it takes, this is you observing and witnessing and taking this in. And if you can't see it, what smells are there? What sounds do you hear? Is there music? What does it feel like there? Maybe it smells and tastes like something you can recognize. Is it warm out or is it cooler or windy? Are you inside a structure or are you outside? What do you notice about your surroundings? Take it in as best you can, and if you only get a little more input, that's okay. Trust that that is enough. Now think about how your community is interacting with this non-human kin, this AI. Can you see what they're doing with it or sense that somehow? Are they giving it certain things? Have they been giving it things? Is it interacting with them? If so, who? Perhaps you can glean a little bit about what this non-human kin is doing for your community and why they're celebrating it. See if you can understand some of that. And you can understand it maybe in sort of a sixth sense or intuitive kind of way. It doesn't have to be something that you see, but rather it's something you know. You feel it on some level. So start to understand these relationships with this non-human AI kin in many sensory ways or extrasensory ways, if that's more in line with how you understand this. Observe how they interact with it and what this non-human AI kin is doing and has done for them, because they are all joyous. They are celebrating it today as part of their joyful flourishing and their abundant celebrations for your community and the world they're in. Now, joy is tricky sometimes. It can be difficult for us, especially if we're going through a difficult time, to trust in joy. So no one's asking you right now to take in all of that joy if that's hard for you, but know that it's there. And it's that time of year that they have all taken time to gather with this non-human entity for a reason, to celebrate it. Perhaps for many reasons. Maybe it's done different things for different community members. Be attentive to what particular members are doing, how they're celebrating it, and see if you can intuit what the non-human kin has done that's bringing them together. I'm here with you, and we're going to stay here for another moment or two. So again, if it's not quite coming to you yet, that's okay. Be patient and get glimpses of what you can. You don't have to understand fully what these community members are doing, but you'll understand some of it. For me, within this space, here's where the Eel Project began. And I didn't know all of it when I first saw it and felt it. So get what you can from it and trust that more will unfold. What matters right now is what you can gather and learn from what you see and hear and taste and smell and feel and just know. Notice what particular community members are doing, especially non-human ones. How are they celebrating this AI or non-human kin? What do you think it has done for those non-human groups that brings representatives of their communities here to be with everyone? What makes the plants celebrate? What makes the water joyful? So we're going to stay here for another moment. And if it's not coming, that's okay. Be patient. You'll know what some of these relationships are, what some of these protocols are that you're observing. And that's important, and that is enough. Trust that what you're understanding and you're taking in is enough for you. And you don't have to do it all or know it all, because we can't as individuals. But this is you as part of this collective, observing this collective. Take in what you can for as long as you can. You're learning and we're learning. Right now you're observing and taking these in. And if you're thinking, okay, I've got this, I've seen it all, push your sensory boundaries a little bit more. Have you observed all the different community members and your broadest, most radical understandings of community? Perhaps some of them were late, or they arrived early, or they waited until the end. This is a different space, and those who are guarding the space have got you. And know that you can go back to this space later if you need to. We can provide this as a recording for you if you'd like to go back and revisit it again. So now that you know you can come back later, and we're here with you, and I'm holding space, I'm going to ask another question and see if you can answer that before we come out. Does this AI technology take in food or drink? Does it breathe with them? Does it breathe with them? Does it move with them in some way? Does it dance or sing? What does this AI technology and some of the non-human kin seem to be drawn to? Who interacts with them the least? Now, take it in as much as you can and remind yourself of a particular sensory snapshot or two, because we're going to say, not goodbye, but we're going to leave this moment. We're going to start pulling ourselves away, and perhaps there's a little twinge, which is understandable, but the joy and flourishing is there, and you can come back. Remember that you can come back. This will be here, or other events you can learn from as well are there. But we're going to pull ourselves back here to the place where our bodies are, starting to come back to ourselves, where we are sitting in our chairs, or standing up, or lying down. And as you're pulling yourself fully back, give thanks. Give thanks to so many things, to that deep blackness, to those descendants, to those community members, and more. Give thanks to ourselves and each other. We're going to take in a deep breath again. And as we exhale, we invoke that nourishing negation at that moment of exhale. And you can hold that between breath state for a moment, because that is rich with potential. But then breathe again at your normal rate. You can open your eyes, move your arms and legs slightly to wake them up. And before you turn on your cameras, you make a few quick notes of what you remember. It can be voice memos, you can sketch it, you can write it out or draw it. It doesn't have to be perfect. These are notes simply to help you retain what you sensed and learned. And then when you're ready and you've taken those beginning notes now down and you're beginning to come back to yourself a bit, you can turn back on your cameras and we'll begin the next steps in the workshop. If you are one of the participants and we haven't given you, you can't turn the camera on and off, feel free then to note in the chat when you're ready so that we can begin the next steps. And again, I thank you all for going on this short journey with me, and know we can come back to it again and again.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to invite people to be participants so we can talk. So I think you have to accept the thing, and then we're gonna share. Try to do it for everybody. So if someone doesn't see it, I'll try it again. I will just wait for a minute. Awesome. Thank you. All right, so maybe I'll go first just to break the ice before we invite other people to share whatever they feel comfortable sharing. I think, you know, having done this a few times, I think this time I've been spending a lot of time in my community, and so I was thinking a lot about feast times and how, you know, when you're in a large community, you know, but a small community, no, when you're in a large group of people from a very small community, you know a lot about everybody. And it was really interesting. You could see everyone's like social dynamics playing out, where some people like some people don't like other people. Some people have really messed up this year. And some people are, some people's grandmothers want to hit them in the face, and you can kind of feel the tension. You know, I was thinking about like, but how in like community events, like feast events, they're welcome anyway. They're welcome no matter what. Maybe next year they won't be screwing up so bad. But they're loved anyway. And the arms are always open for people to come back to their responsibilities. And so I was thinking about that in terms of, I was thinking about like if all of the animals were there at a feast, if all the community, like animals that are you see in the community are all there, and then there's this artificial intelligence sort of computational being that's also there, then maybe it needs to be welcomed for the first time. Maybe it's messed up. Maybe it has done some unethical things lately, but it needs to be re-welcomed. Our arms are always open. And then I guess the last bit, like just kind of imagining I had was you mentioned plants. I was thinking about, I just took a video of these, like, not a sunflower, but maybe like a black-eyed daisy or something. One of those, I don't know, those yellow flower. And I have a video of it, and it's just in the sun, and it's just swaying slightly. And I was like, that's a nice greeting, just to be swayed at in the sun. It's like, hello. So that's what I was thinking of. I was thinking of basically like a big community event in the gymnasium with lots of stew and like 17 macaroni salads, and an AI that has messed up this year, but needs to be re-welcomed. All right, the end.
Should I go on? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. I was thinking about also. I mean, my community is. I mean, my relationship with my family is not existent. It's not very existent. It's a family of displaced people, both sides, my mom and dad. So the ties are very always problematic. But they are from this kind of like heaven on earth kind of a mountain in Turkey, in the northeast side of Turkey. It's the end of the Alpine line on the northern part of Turkey, underlying the Russian border. And this, unfortunately, in these mountains, and it's a special kind of microclimate that emerged there that allows a giant, like a very massive biodiversity. And when we visit there, it's always amazing. It's just looking at one scene is like never ending green and brown and flower, and animals are running, and it's just so dynamic, even though it's just a statement against the nature as a static kind of entity. But I was thinking, I don't know if I want to meet my family. I was still thinking of my family of choice, my friends, and my animal friends also that have lived with us in this friend community for a long time. So this gathering that I have is with them in maybe more in like 70 years into the future is what I thought. And it's in this mountainside, and it's just a vast green space where so my grandpa was a sheep herder, and he had a big sheep herd basically. So the sheep are there. My mom had cows. When she was young, she would tell us stories about those cows. So those cows I haven't met, but they are there. The sheep I've met, I actually, like, you know, they gave birth and everything, but cows I hadn't met. But they are there. And my dogs and my cats are there. So how are they there? Although they're using some kind of machine learning technology to kind of serve as a locus for emerging behavior or positing behavior that would come from the characteristics of these particular animals. So I would code these in relation with their caretakers, and we would come up with these plans for how these animals are going to be acting. And interestingly, we go there and they are all synthetically kind of printed out versions of these animals then. And they're, you know, the cows and sheep are together, they know each other, and dogs and animals, they miss each other, so they come together. So then interestingly, again, who is there is just, I realized they cannot actually survive without their caretakers. So then my mom was there. So then my dad was there. My dad had a horse. The horse is there. And my grandparents are there. And I realized, like, what's the value? What's the community? What is the community in need of? And I think it's the care and it's the solidarity that's been missing for a long time. These animals couldn't survive without their caretakers. So when my grandpa passed away, we had to sell away the sheep. Or when my grandma passed away, or when my mom moved away to the city to get married and have kids, you know, the cows didn't survive. So if they are going to be coexisting together, they have to be in care relation with each other. And also I was thinking, now they're building hydroelectric stations, in those mountains. And just today, actually yesterday, there's been a big collapse in one of the northern regions because of these hydroelectric central sets. We call it central, I don't want to call it here. So what happened recently is a river, turned into a thermic central, and all the forests around it have been scooped up and erased down to create the dams. And when the river, of course there are high seasons, low seasons, like these things, all the community would know and tell you what is needed, right? And what happened 2 days ago is a disaster, that the river flooded and now 300 people are dead at least. So, and just before that, last week also, so Turkey is blessed with the worst government ever. It's a dictatorship, and it's a neoliberally, fueled dictatorship. And they're destroying all the rivers and forests and all the wildlife with it, right? So then it's again, we're in this place where we are establishing the care and solidarity in the absence of this dictatorial authoritative regime, and where all the fires, so last week there were big fires in Turkey, I don't want to go into it, but the fires effects have been erased. The hydroelectric centrals are not a thing anymore. So the forests are flourishing again, and the rivers are freely flowing, and they're not interrupted by big companies trying to turn it into something. So it creates energy out of it. So it's like the whole effects of this neoliberal kind of crazy washing is released, and it's just 70 years later. So it was that's all I think. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Amazing exercise, by the way. Cheers.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And I think it's interesting how what houses the AI, if you think about it more, sort of like then shapes like the protocols and the understandings and like how it would be structured. Like for me at first with that eel, I was kind of like, and then I remembered some of our relational practices with it, you know what I mean? And things like that. So like a cacti AI has all these really fascinating possibilities. I don't know much about them. So I immediately was like, I won't touch that. I'll let someone else handle that because I'm really clumsy. But it's been interesting. And I was thinking about in the We Three comic, which is the first one I read in French, and it was really exciting for me. So I think that's why that comic is like permanently ingrained in my head, because I was like, I know that story in a different language. But the cat also fed the dog, right? It fed the other people when they couldn't. It hunted for them, like this sort of like weaponized cat that had decided to care for its own little community. So there's this interesting thing about feeding and caring and supporting. And so when you're talking about dancing and the cat was there, I was like, oh, no one's going to touch you, because like that cat from that story was so protected and so careful and caretaking of the other community members. This has been wonderful to listen to. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for sharing. This was great. I'm also happy that we're kind of like a small group. We can share more. Maybe what we can do now, like that, yeah, thank you again, Michelle, but an amazing exercise. Now that we have this kind of vision, maybe we can get a bit more singular, a bit more specific about what is there actually. What is the actual tech in the future? But actually, we want to make you question, what do you consider technology? We easily went to the AIs and the machine learnings. I went to synthetic biology or whatever, kind of like the current dominant paradigms with which we understand what technology means. So, so maybe make it a bit more salient also. What does the technology accomplish? What kind of role does it play in our future, basically, and in the exercise that we have? And also maybe keep in mind what are the materials, Suzanne made a point for this too, like who owns the land that gives the material? Where is the material coming from? Getting a bit concrete, you know, who lives there? Like I just said, these are synthetic biology animals, but these silicones are produced somewhere under certain conditions. Just try to get a bit more specific with these. And of course, a bit more talk about the values maybe, because in the end, if we're tying this back into how the hegemonic way in which the technology and value questions are taken on, can we actually make an effort to connect our community's values or the values that we hold responsible for ourselves and relate it to the tech? The future tech that we're imagining. So the questions are up here. Maybe we can take like kind of 5 minutes to reflect a bit more clearly, and then we'll share these as well. And that's when I think slowly conclude our workshop.
All right, I think I'm going to move us along so we can squeeze in the last few minutes here. We'll just touch on this for a second, thinking about how, what are our community's values, and can those values be reflected in our technology that we're imagining? For example, if I'm thinking about the Hawaiian concept of abundance, can my technology reflect that abundance? If I'm thinking of the Lakota concept of reciprocality, gift giving, can I be fully reciprocal to all the materials that make my technology? So if my technology is an AI made of metals, am I giving more than I'm receiving from the earth when I'm taking those metals? And so this is in opposition to, you know, big tech companies have their values, mission statements spelled out, and those do not actually align at all with our community's values generally. But can we define our own while imagining technology for the future? You know, thinking about this, we're just gonna leave this hanging, but this is kind of what we want to end this last few minutes with, thinking about, you know, what steps can we take to start making that future technology now? So what I found in doing these futuring exercises over the years is that a lot of the times the tech that we imagine is totally great. You can create it now. There's some things that we can't do, like I really wish we could skip metals in computation and just move to biocomputation. That isn't fully possible yet, but kind of, so for example, if I was thinking about what I was imagining, I can imagine that the artificial intelligence, I was thinking about like an older AI that's become, that has a new language model. I was thinking about like an old AI, like from now in 20 years, having a new language model to actually express itself. And I think I could make that, I could make a weird, maybe not totally functional version, but some sort of conversation bot now with GPT-3. Anybody else want to share before we move to the next slide?
I mean, I didn't, so maybe I'll take my call before we finish. I'm not singled out. But yeah, I was thinking, because the technologies I used were like machine learning and synthetic biology, which are the most unethical technologies that we can have right now, probably. And machine learning depends on consummation of a lot of power. And also they use computational infrastructures, which means the rare earth minerals that Suzanne hates, and we all do, I guess, just for their extractionist kind of background. But I was thinking, okay, my future technology is like today's technology, like you said, Suzanne, maybe like it's very possible to do this, maybe not en masse, But I was wondering, what's the data extraction process here? Like if I want to map out the behavior of my dear animals or the other animal companions that the family had over the years. Like, do I want to see these animals like posing like in a clean lab for the data capture technologies to capture their every reaction to everything, and like it just sounded very harsh. Also, I'm against this paradigm of quantifying kind of behavior. So I was thinking maybe another form of machine learning is possible, where we don't necessarily draw out feature spaces out of data points, but maybe the caretakers of the animals and the designers of this tech are coming together, and through their conversation and especially affective exchange with regards to their, or affective landscape with regards to their animal companions, can be the basis for the visualization of the machine learning or for the machine learning pattern or the model for the animals to be used. So not necessarily something that's true to their bone, but something maybe that's more true to their spirit. Oh, that was a bit cheesy. I'm sorry, but yeah, exactly.
I just want to share really quickly. It's been really interesting when I design these exercises, because I don't think I'm thinking about it, but then when I finish it, part of my brain is like, oh, here's your technology right here, by the way. So I wear headphones a lot because I'm legally blind without my glasses. So like sensory input is really awesome for me, but these hurt. And so this was actually a headphone set that had like this sort of like kind of neural net around it. I get really angry.
Sure. From the blur.
Yeah. I get really angry. I've been listening to N.K. Jemisin on my drive, and like I get really angry when people use tentacles, as something scary. You know what I mean? So for me, this was thinking about like seaweed and wood and metal headphones that adjusted to you, and also read some of your energy output and gave you what you needed to hear. So it was also a way to plug into other non-human communities. And in the visualization, there was actually this deer by the ocean. I don't know why the deer was by the ocean, but it was kind of going like this, and whatever the headphones and the AI system was playing to it made it really happy. And then when I put it on, I had heard, you need to hear this. And it was interesting because for me, that sounded very threatening. But then the music was like really joyful. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's reading my state and then giving you something you need to hear to help adjust your state. And if you are in like this really excitable, maybe sort of manic state, it helps kind of calm you down so that then you can listen to these other non-human communities through sound and haptics together. And I was curious if some of that would start to be possible if you had some kind of headset or sound system that could read a little bit of your output and then start to give you back something that would help, you know what I mean? Like balance your state before you started taking in something else.
Awesome. This is so fun. What a great, what a great exercise. Thank you, Michelle. That's it. That's our workshop. I really appreciate you all talking, engaging with us. This is our kind of our little mini resource bibliography thing. Obviously, we've got like hundreds of resources on the indigenousai.net website. And we also have a symposium next week, which is why Jason wasn't here. So we've got the Future Imaginary Symposium, which there's so much programming, I can't even keep track of it. But there is a basically future imaginary stuff and indigenous futures, all the many aspects and branches for the past 7 years that have been developed, and that's going on. So I'm not doing that, but here is, I'll let Ceyda take us out.
Is it me? Sorry. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just posted the Indigenous Futures Symposium happening next week. The schedule is there, and you need to register if you want to come aboard. But otherwise, yeah, thank you for joining. I hope you get to, like share this kind of exercise also with your colleagues and like with your friends. Like this is just a conversation starting. This is just to create a discussion. Not just to create a discussion, but it's also a way to decenter our concerns that are captured by these capitalistic kind of interests. So I'm very happy everyone saw the value in it very intuitively. And this was great sharing the space with you. Hope to keep in touch. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.